Right, so we are continuing on today with some of the EK K-swap process. On the agenda, I have, off camera, managed to fit the heater control for the interior on the new K-swap lines, which is good. And then we are currently going to drill a hole through, I'll show you in a minute, but from the interior through to just under here where the subframe mounts. And then that should let us route the cables, the gear linkages for the shifter cables through the car from the engine bay to the interior to the new shifter. So the hole we just drilled in the interior is now come through to the bottom of the engine bay just here. And then what we've got to do from here is take a hole saw from the engine bay side. We're going about 44mm, I think. And then that'll put a hole straight through and we'll be able to run our shifter cables through to the interior. So I just tried fitting the heater hose from the opposite side for the interior heating valve, and this hose end is a little bit too big for what goes on the engine. So what I'm going to do is use some of the older pipe which fits right and mock it up to probably cut it somewhere there. But I'll fit it to the engine and then see where I need to cut it on the valve. But for a bit of a better fit, I'm going to use some of the old hose. So I've now got the heater hoses all hooked up to the back of the engine. I've used a K-tuned line for this one, and for the bottom of this as well I've used the K-tuned line, and then just for this top bit I needed to cut off some of the old pipe, and then I've just mated it up, and now that works perfectly as well. In my infinite wisdom, I have made an idiot of myself. So you would have seen the hose that I cut up to fit back down there, I thought initially was the old heater hose from the D-Series. After routing through the box and trying to find the hose that goes from the thermostat housing there to the upper coolant housing, I couldn't find it. But what I did find in the process was another bit of pipe which reminded me with a slit in it, and I went, oh, I wonder where that's come from. Remembering that that was the other heater pipe that we took off. And then we've now clocked that this pipe that I've taken off and that bit that's meant to go from just there to up there is also that bit that I've used down there. So yes, it's the right size and that will work, but it now means I've got to get another hose for this, which is annoying. So I've got to try and find one of them now. On the flip side, we've got the thermostat housing bolted back on with the old bolts, and the reason we've used the old bolts again is I have got new ones on order, but they're going to take 7 to 10 days to come. So we wanted to get that on and forgotten about until we can get the new bolts, at which point obviously we'll just change them over. And then Brad has also sealed up. We've now put a little rubber grommet where the hole is in the firewall and sealed around that, so the shifter cables are now in. And we're now working on getting the clutch slave back on and seeing if we can get obviously the clutch line linked up and then filled with fluid and bled. We've moved the fuel pressure regulator gauge from the fuel rail onto the regulator, which I think we're going to put somewhere down here, mainly because the mounts have two like the engine mounts have two heights you can have on them, so you can either have the engine in the up position or like the lower position. We've got it set in the higher position. There's another slot underneath that, but we've got it set in the higher one, and with the pressure gauge, if it's on the actual line, just hits the bonnet. So instead of having it on the line just here and having to like either dint or cut out a little square in the bonnet for this to go, we decided to just put it on the regulator instead. So we're also going to work through the fuel system. So we've got like a banjo bolt and a 6N line that's going to go from here to one side of the fuel rail. It's then going to go through the fuel rail, out the other side, into the pressure regulator, and then from the pressure regulator into the fuel return, which is just this rubber hose here that we can take off and then screw the new one in. We've also got three different types of lines. So we've got this one, which is the only fitting with like a Jubilee clip on it, so that's got to be from the fuel pressure regulator to the fuel rail, like the return pipe. And then basically you just need to test fit these two to see which one's going to be better to go from the fuel pump to the rail and then the rail to the regulator, depending on obviously the length and then the route that we've got to run. So the fuel system is nearly finished now. The only issue we've got is the fitting that's meant to go from here. So all of these are 6 AN lines, including the fittings that are going into like the fuel pressure regulator. Apart from this one, so the fuel return is a 4AN fitting, and that goes into a 4AN to M14 fitting that screws just into the bottom of the regulator. But the problem being is the old fitting, you want me to see, doesn't really have much of a shoulder on the nut. So when you tighten it up, instead of it going tight and sealing, it just goes. The nut isn't, it doesn't stick out wide enough from the thread to actually tighten up. It just goes straight into the regulator. So I need to get another fitting for that, which isn't a problem. But other than that, we've got the lines routed and all connected up and tightened. And I've also just connected the throttle cable inside. So that is now together and in. We just need to adjust that there. So much progress has been made. We've been doing a few little things tonight that I've just been sort of buttoning everything up. I don't know how I'm going to work the format of them and what you guys are going to see in one video compared to the next, and that, so on and so forth. It depends sort of how much, when it all edits down, how much goes into whatever. But yeah, tonight's progress is we've now got the fuel rail set up on. So we've got our supply coming down into the rail, straight out into a regulator, which we've mounted just on the strut tower. And then, like as I said earlier, I've got to get another fitting for this line, because the 4AN line that goes onto this return and then into the M14 that goes into the bottom of the regulator, unfortunately, isn't quite right. So I've got to get another fitting for that. But on the flip side, we've also got the Hell braided clutch line in, which is routed around the back, and then up to the clutch, up to the firewall, and the throttle cable is also in and sorted. So we can now take them off the list and move on to some of the next bits. Now, in my infinite wisdom, I've yet again forgot to film an outro, so thank you very, very much for watching. Keep posted, because we're now getting to the point where we're buttoning up the last few bits, ready to get it back on the road.